You have stopped defending yourself, you have stopped explaining. And the people who once demanded your energy now feel something they cannot name when you go silent. They call it cold, they call it intimidating, they call it a power play. But you know the truth, your silence is not a weapon. It is the moment you stopped offering yourself as a sacrifice. Welcome to Power and Myth. The internet calls this the Sigma INFJ, but that phrase is a shadow cast by something far older. What you are living is not a personality trend. It is the Hermit's withdrawal, the Guardian's boundary, the moment the exile stops apologizing for the space they require to exist. This is Jungian archetypal psychology, the patterns Jung identified in those who must retreat to preserve what is performing. And in a world built on constant availability, that refusal reads as a threat. Let us be precise about what is actually happening when you go quiet. You are not withholding. You are not punishing. You are simply no longer translating yourself into a language palatable enough for those who never learn to meet you where you are. The INFJ, who has discovered the power of silence, has usually spent years doing the opposite. Years of over-explaining, of preemptive apologies, of making yourself small enough to fit into conversations that were never built to hold your depth. You learned young that your natural way of being was too much for most people, too intense, too seeing, too aware of the currents beneath the surface, and so you performed a more acceptable version of yourself. You softened your observations, you laughed at jokes that bored you, you participated in small talk that felt like slowly suffocating, and then one day you stopped. Not dramatically, not as revenge. You stopped because continuing costs more than you could afford to pay. This is what they're responding to when your silence disturbs them. You have ceased being manageable. You have withdrawn your participation from a dynamic that required your constant translation. And they feel it, not as your absence, but as the presence of something they cannot control. The hermit does not retreat from weakness. The hermit retreats because the lantern they carry requires tending, and that work cannot be done in the village square. Your silence is not antisocial. It is the recognition that your inner world is the primary world, and that maintaining it requires protecting it from those who treat depth as performance, insight as entertainment, and knowing as something to be explained until it becomes small enough to dismiss. When you go silent, you are not shutting people out, you are shutting the noise out, the constant demand that you justify your perceptions, the expectation that you will make your knowing comfortable for those who fear it, the relentless pressure to perform connection with people who mistake your presence for availability. You are the one who absorbs the room's emotional temperature without being asked, the one who sees the ending of the story whilst everyone else is still enjoying Act 1, the one who knows what someone needs before they have words for it, and all of that requires silence to process, not the silence of absence, but the silence of deep attention turned inward. What others experience as you going cold is actually you going deep, and they cannot follow you there, so they call it rejection. Here is the shadow you must face, though. There are times your silence is not a boundary, it is a barrier. Times when withdrawal is not self-preservation but self-protection taken too far. Times when you stop speaking not because translation is exhausting, but because you have decided in advance that you will not be understood. Jung knew the difference between healthy individuation and defensive isolation. The hermit who never returns from the mountain has not found wisdom. They have found a different kind of exile. You must ask yourself honestly, are there moments when your silence is punishment dressed as a boundary? Times when you have door slammed, not because someone violated your values, but because they failed to read your mind? The INFJ's greatest relational wound is often the belief that if someone truly loved you, they would simply know. They would perceive your needs without you naming them. They would understand your silence without you explaining it. And when they do not, when they ask questions or request clarity, you interpret it as proof that they cannot meet you. This is the shadow of the seer. You become so accustomed to reading others that you forget they do not have your gift. You expect them to perceive you the way you perceive them. And when they cannot, you retreat. Not into sacred solitude, but into resentment. Your silence becomes a test they did not know they were taking. And they fail it. Not because they do not care, but because you never told them the test existed. But when your silence is clean, when it arises not from withdrawal but from presence, it holds a power that others feel immediately. This is not the cold silence of the door slam. This is the silence of the oracle, who has seen something and will not unsee it to make others comfortable. The silence of the guardian standing at the threshold, allowing passage to some and refusing it to others, not from cruelty but from clarity. The silence of the wounded healer who has learned that not everyone is ready to be healed, and that offering your gift to those who will not receive it is not generosity. It is self-abandonment. The people who are disturbed by this silence are usually the ones who benefited from your constant availability, the ones who mistook your empathy for weakness, your willingness to explain for uncertainty, your depth for something they could access whenever they needed emotional labor performed for free. When you stop offering that, they do not feel neutral, they feel destabilized. Because your silence reveals something they have been avoiding, they were taking more than they were giving. They were asking you to translate yourself into their language, whilst never learning yours. They were comfortable with your intensity when it served them, and dismissive of it when it did not. Your silence did not change the dynamic. Your silence revealed the dynamic that was always there. What the ancients understood and what Jung spent decades mapping is this. Certain people are wired to perceive patterns that most cannot see. Introverted intuition, the dominant function of the INFJ, operates by synthesizing vast amounts of unconscious data and delivering complete knowings. You walk into a room and you know something is wrong before anyone has spoken. You hear someone's story and you see the invisible thread connecting it to a pattern that will repeat in 6 months. You observe a relationship and you perceive its ending whilst everyone else is celebrating its beginning. This is not magic. This is cognitive architecture, and it requires silence to function. The noise of constant social performance, the demand for immediate response, the expectation that you will engage with surface-level conversation as though it matters as much as the depth you naturally inhabit, all of this interferes with the signal. Your silence is not withdrawal from others, it is attention to the signal. And that signal is often telling you something about those others that they do not want known. You see through the performance. You perceive the incongruence between what someone says and what they mean. You feel the gap between the persona they present and the self they have disowned. And your silence, your refusal to pretend you do not see it, makes them deeply uncomfortable, because it confronts them with their own self-deception, not through accusation, but through your simple presence as someone who cannot be lied to, even when the lie is unconscious. This is why your silence terrifies in ways that anger or confrontation never could. Anger can be dismissed. Confrontation can be defended against. But your silence offers nothing to react to. It simply is. And in that spacious, witnessing presence, people feel seen in ways they are not ready for. The gift and the burden of the INFJ is that you offer people the truth of themselves reflected back. And most people are not prepared to meet that reflection. So they call your silence cold. They call it judgmental. They call it a weapon, because naming it as their own discomfort with being truly seen would require a level of self-awareness they have not yet developed. Your silence is not the problem. Their inability to meet you in it is. And you are no longer required to make that your emergency. If you have recognized yourself in this, if you have felt the strange power and the strange loneliness of being someone whose silence says more than most people's words, you are in the right place. Tell me in the comments which moment landed hardest. Are you the hermit, retreating to tend the lantern, the guardian holding the threshold, the exile finally done with translation? And if you want to continue exploring what it means to be an INFJ who has stopped performing, subscribe. This is Power and Myth. Your silence is not a weapon, it is a boundary. And boundaries are not cruel, they are clarity. You are part of something here. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.